idea that wealthy individuals, many of them right-wing, can both pay for cases before the court and at the same time give justices gifts or trips is outrageous.
Yeah, there should be term limits.
Why?
People sit in there too long. Then you get too old.
She's going to make that decision probably in the next 6-7 days. I would imagine we'll know who her running mate is.
Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. We'll see what happens. Will Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer be the pick or not? But meanwhile, surrogates for Vice President Kamala Harris, the presumptive Democratic nominee, busy campaigning today as vice presidential contenders stump from Pennsylvania to Michigan. All this while former President Donald Trump's VP pick, Ohio Senator JD Vance, you know he's been facing scrutiny for those past comments discussing childless Americans and political leadership, among other things. We'll get to all that later. But let's begin with President Biden. He's in the news today proposing major reforms to the U.S. Supreme Court, usually a sleepy time in the summer. No longer for the court. They're in the spotlight. President Biden proposing term limits for justices and an enforceable code of conduct. The administration also proposing a constitutional amendment that dictates no immunity for crimes for a former president committed while in office.
This nation was founded on the principle there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law. And for all practical purposes, the court's decision almost certainly means that the president can violate their oath, flout our laws, and face no consequences.
Now let's bring in our reporter panel, Molly Ball and Josh Gerstein. Molly is a senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Josh, a senior legal affairs reporter for Politico. Josh, I want to begin with you, and let's first listen to something Senator Lindsey Graham had to say on Face the Nation on Sunday.
Every day, it comes out Vance has done something more extreme, more weird, more erratic. Vance seems to be more erratic and more extreme than President Trump. And I'll bet President Trump is sitting there scratching his head and wondering, why did I pick this guy?
Well, we'll get to that in a moment. That's Senator Chuck Schumer of New York talking about JD Vance, taking his shot at JD Vance. Not unusual, but Senator Lindsey Graham said on Face the Nation that Supreme Court reform is dead on arrival in the Senate. Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, used those exact words. What's your take on the legal aspect of what's being proposed here, Josh, by President Biden? 18-year term limits. Is this something that has a historic precedent? How do you see it as a legal reporter?
Well, I mean, it seems to me there's pretty formidable obstacles to any of this actually happening. And so I think that has to be acknowledged, like right off the bat. Even the White House is admitting that some of this requires a constitutional amendment to change the decision on immunity would require that. And some legal scholars think even the term limits proposal requires constitutional amendment. Unless the Senate drops its filibuster rule for legislation, it's going to be hard for any of this to actually take place. But I don't think that means it's not significant. I mean, because Biden was so strenuously opposed to this when it was proposed originally in the last campaign cycle. He pretty much gave a hard no on it, despite sort of taking some shots from people on the left because he gave a hard no on it. So for him to now say, well, I'm in favor of it, is a pretty significant reversal. And I think it does indicate that his thinking on the subject has shifted. His people will say it's because the Supreme Court has done things over the last 3.5 years to provoke him that they had not done before.
Molly, on a political level, he's not advocating, President Biden, to expand the court. And that's something many progressives would like to see. Critics call it packing the court. But he is calling for term limits, code of ethics. What's your read on it, that kind of proposal, what it means about where the president is politically in his final few months in his term?
Yeah, well, I think, as Josh said, he has not gone all the way to the left in terms of calling for court packing, but he has gone much further than anywhere that he has been in the past. And I think that says a couple of things. I think, first of all, the president proposed this at a time when he still expected to be the candidate, and he saw this as a political move that could help to energize the Democratic base. As Representative Kenyatta just testified to, that's not a problem that the Democrats feel like they have anymore, but it very much was a problem that presidential candidate Joe Biden was having as recently as a couple of weeks ago. And so to extend these sort of olive branches to the left was part of his strategy to try to increase that enthusiasm that he didn't really have for his own candidacy. But I do think that it also fits with the theme of his increasing concern about the structures of American democracy. And, you know, a Republican like Lindsey Graham might say you can't claim to be concerned about the integrity of American institutions if you're involved in tearing them down. But from the perspective, I think, of many Democrats, it's the court that has violated longstanding norms and needs to be reined in by the other branches, and that's sort of what the separation of powers is all about.
Let's play a clip from former President Trump. He's talking to an evangelical audience, and he's talking about voting. Let's listen.
They all say, I think he's changed. I think he's changed since 2 weeks ago. Something affected him. No, I haven't changed. Maybe I've gotten worse, actually, because I get angry at the incompetence that I witness every single day.
And at that same event, he said, quote, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. Josh, you're a legal reporter. There's been this Supreme Court ruling on presidential power. Many critics of former President Trump look at his quotes at that rally, and they say this is a president who could be unbound if he wins another term. What's the significance of what the Supreme Court did, and what's your read as a reporter on the kind of presidency Trump's articulating could be on the horizon?
Well, I mean, my view on the decision that came out on immunity, which was on July 1st, which sort of feeds into all this, is that the sort of center block on the court, which we should stress is a much more conservative court than it used to be, so the center block is pretty conservative, decided they were far more concerned about the prospect of future presidents being harassed by criminal litigation or threats of criminal prosecution after they left office than they were basically about the Trump threat here, which is the possibility that he would intentionally do things that he was told was illegal while he was president. And, you know, that was one of the main concerns that was raised in front of the Supreme Court. And the 3 justices that are often seen as sitting closer to the center of the court, that would be Justice Kavanaugh, Chief Justice Roberts, and perhaps Justice Barrett, they all seem to be more concerned about that other issue of future prosecutions and presidents being encumbered than they were about sort of the worst interpretation of the comments that the former president recently made about there possibly being no need to vote for anyone after the current election cycle, which, if you take it in a literal sense, is obviously pretty ominous.
We have to leave it there. Molly, I can't believe I don't have time to ask you about the vice presidential search. I need the Molly Ball take. She'll have to come back soon. Please come back soon. Josh Gerstein, Molly Ball, are 2 of our favorites. Joining us is Tom Dupree. He formerly served as the Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President George W. Bush. Tom, great to have you here. Always good to talk with you. What do you make of the Biden proposals?
Well, politically, I think it's a non-starter. I can't imagine that surprises Biden or his allies to learn that the Republican response was that this is just not going anywhere. I think substantively, I guess what worries me a little bit is that these proposals for Supreme Court reform are being proposed in such an openly, transparently political context. Clearly, the president is upset at recent Supreme Court decisions, and he says, look, I want to kind of reset the membership, enact fundamental reforms. But the fact that this is being done in a politicized way so soon before the election makes me think that they may not be looking out for the best institutional interests of the nation in the Supreme Court, but rather trying to fire up the base and score some political points.
Democrats are concerned about Justice Clarence Thomas. They think he has been too cozy with his friends, and that remains an issue. As someone who served in the Bush administration in some capacity, how do you think conservatives react to that Democratic criticism?
Well, I think the conservatives often will say, look, how come ethics has now become a thing? In other words, conservatives will point to other situations where you had more liberal justices being involved in ethical issues or raising the same types of concerns, and you didn't see the same groundswell, at least on the left, for Supreme Court ethics reform. And so I think a lot of conservatives really see this as an attack on the conservative justices, on the conservative outcomes that have been prevailing lately in the Supreme Court, rather than a meaningful way to get reform. The court, of course, also just did adopt its own ethics code after coming under incredible pressure from all sides. They adopted it, and I think a lot of people say, give this a chance to work before we go to reform the court.
In the legal world, though, so this is the president in the executive branch proposing reform to the judicial branch. The judicial branch, some people have said, well, they shouldn't police themselves. Is there any other option for Supreme Court oversight? Is it Congress at the end of the day or not?
Well, if you're talking about just the structure of the Supreme Court and the way they govern their internal operations, I do think that is the Supreme Court's prerogative to make its own decisions. I mean, the Constitution creates the Supreme Court as our third branch of government, the judiciary. And so in that sense, it really is the court's prerogative to police its own house, decide how it's going to conduct its own operations, just as the Supreme Court wouldn't purport to instruct the president on how he must fulfill his executive duties or purport to direct Congress that they have to pass certain laws. There are certain things that each of the branches do by themselves. And although there can be regulation and there's always kind of a creative push and pull, I think at the end of the day, what's being talked here is the core function of the Supreme Court and how it organizes its internal affairs.
Among top attorneys in this country, is there a belief in private that eventually the court will expand and not just have 9 justices? Or is there a sense that it could very much become a bigger court with term limits in the near future?
I don't see it happening. I see the proposals continuing. I think when you have a slew of decisions that people on one side or the other don't like, there is going to be talk about expanding the court and changing its membership. But practically, I don't see it happening. We have had 9 justices for a long time. Justice Ginsburg famously said she thought 9 was the right number. It's not required by the Constitution. We've had times in our nation's history where we've had fewer than 9 justices, more than 9 justices, but the 9 membership has remained constant since the Civil War. And I think most people agree it's the right number. You become very cumbersome if you have a court with 20 or 30 people on it. 9 seems like the right number, and I think we're going to be sticking with it for a while.
And very quickly, who do you think the next justice to retire is?
Oh, my goodness. Well, it depends who wins the election. So we see that, and then I think you can make a bet as who's going to retire next.
Oh, wait. We do actually have a minute left here. The term limits, what do you make of President Biden 18 years, putting that number in specifically as the guideline?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, look, I will say I'm not a big fan of Supreme Court reform by and large. I think the court as currently structured and formulated has served this nation very well for a long time. That said, look, I think term limits, I can see one advantage to it is that it really would untether the Supreme Court appointment process from the political process in a way that we don't have now, where you do have the fortuity of particular presidents getting to make multiple appointments. Some presidents don't make any appointments, just depending on the timing of when people leave the court. So that would have the advantage of making it more regular. So you would know that every president will appoint 1, maybe 2 justices of his or her own choosing.
Well, President Biden keeps getting out there. I think we're going to keep hearing a lot about this Supreme Court proposal.
I think you're right.
But whether it's realistic politically, the Speaker said today it's dead on arrival. Senator Graham told me over the weekend, no way, no how. He works with Democrats on this. So we'll have to see how this all moves ahead.
We'll stay tuned.
But Tom Dupree will stick with CBS News. You see him all the time on our airwaves. And so we appreciate you stopping by. Thank you. We will have more news ahead. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. It's Vice President Kamala Harris and her allies are rallying in Pennsylvania this evening. President Biden making the case for Supreme Court reform in Austin, Texas. Let's bring in Pennsylvania Democratic State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. He is the Democratic nominee in the race to be Pennsylvania's next Auditor General. Great to see you. Thanks for being here on America Decides. This talk of Supreme Court, great to have you. Thank you. This talk of Supreme Court reform, you've run in Pennsylvania numerous times. You know the voters in Pennsylvania. What does this mean for activating the Democratic electorate and for the campaign at large in your state?
You know, part of what the president laid out so well today is the lack of trust and faith that folks have in the Supreme Court. You know, Pennsylvanians are pretty common sense folks. It doesn't make much sense that you have Supreme Court justices ruling on January 6th cases like Justice Thomas when his wife was actually, actively involved in a lot of the activities that we saw around January 6th. Justice Alito's wife was flying the American flag upside down in violation of the flag code. You have these justices, again, back to Clarence Thomas, who are taking trips from billionaires who have active cases before the Supreme Court and then ruling on cases. That doesn't make much sense. That smells of corruption. And frankly, the court has to not only be above reproach, but it has to be seen as being above reproach. This court is full of members that are the most extreme. And I don't think I'm speaking out of school here when I say that we will look back at the Trump versus United States of America case as one of the worst decisions since probably Dred Scott.
Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, do you believe he would put Pennsylvania in the Democratic column if he ended up on the ticket?
Listen, Josh Shapiro is a great friend. He's been an incredible governor. And the good news for us as Democrats is Vice President Harris has been vice president. And so she knows exactly what it takes to be the type of partner that she's been for President Biden for 3.5 years, getting important things done. But to go back to getting important things done, I've been able to do that with our governor the entire time he's been in office. Just a couple of weeks ago, we passed the single largest investment in K-12 education in Pennsylvania history. We just lowered the cost of prescription drugs by doing reforms of our pharmacy benefit managers. And so if the vice president wants a partner that can help her get things done, I think you have to look no further than Josh Shapiro. You know, I serve in the only legislative body in the country that has a divided legislature. And so that means that we have to work across the aisle to get bipartisan solutions, but also it means we have to be unequivocal about leading in a way that makes life better for working people and working families. And I think the vice president has laid out a vision for working people and working families. And what she needs is a partner that can help her execute it. I think Josh Shapiro is well adept at doing just that.
And finally here, State Representative, when you look at the map of Pennsylvania, where do you believe Vice President Harris needs to spend the most time? Is it about rallying Democratic turnout in Philadelphia or Pittsburgh? Is it about trying to make inroads in central Pennsylvania, going up to Scranton, President Biden's hometown, and looking to really rally union members there? What's the top priority in your view?
Listen, I just got back from a 5-day, 10-county tour from Northwest Pennsylvania through the Pennsylvania wilds down to central Pennsylvania. And one thing we should not miss in this moment is the absolute excitement that the vice president has unleashed all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I was in some of the most rural parts of Pennsylvania where I spend a lot of time, where it's not easy to be a Democrat, where frankly, your life would be much easier if you just registered as an independent or a moderate Republican. But you have people who are being reminded by the vice president of their power to not just be shaped by events, but to shape events. And people are showing up in numbers that I've never seen. As you mentioned, I've run statewide before. I know a thing or two about Pennsylvania, and I know that this energy that we're seeing in this moment is like nothing we've ever seen before. The vice president is bringing our party together because that's what she's always done. And so I think the vice president is well equipped to win this state. But I think anybody who knows Pennsylvania knows if you want to win Pennsylvania, you better spend some time in Erie, you better spend some time in Northampton County, and you better be well positioned to get massive turnout in Philadelphia and the collar counties. And our vice president has visited all of those places, is well known, and is generating a type of enthusiasm in those communities that I have never seen in my entire, over half decade being involved in elective politics.
State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta of Pennsylvania, thank you. We appreciate it.
We will have more news ahead. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Michigan Governor and Harris campaign co-chair Gretchen Whitmer says she expects Vice President Kamala Harris to announce her running mate in the next 6 to 7 days. Our CBS reporters are following the possible VP picks.
I'm Shauna Mizell in Louisville, Kentucky, covering the state's governor, Andy Beshear, who's been floated as one of the potential vice presidential running mates for Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. And amid all of that speculation, Beshear has been traveling out of his state and across the country. On Saturday, he was in Iowa, and on Sunday, Beshear was in Georgia at the opening of a Democratic county campaign office. I actually caught up with Beshear in Georgia and asked him about some of the recent comments that we've heard from Donald Trump and JD Vance, including Trump telling Christians to get out and vote, and if they do, they won't have to do so again in 4 years. And I also asked him about JD Vance's comments regarding Kamala Harris, in which Vance called her a childless cat lady.
I don't know what he was saying. I'm a Christian, and I believe that we vote every single election. And my faith is so important to me. It's my why. I believe in that golden rule that says we love our neighbor as ourselves, and the parable of the Good Samaritan that says everyone is our neighbor. So I wish the former president would remember that when he gets up to give his speeches, that our job is to to not judge, to love one another, and ultimately to unite this country to move us forward. That's weird, it's mean, and it's disqualifying. I've told people he ain't from Kentucky, he ain't from Appalachia.
Now, I also asked the Kentucky governor when the last time he spoke to Kamala Harris was. We know that they spoke last Sunday when Biden dropped out of the race. Harris was calling around to a lot of prominent Democrats trying to get their support, and she secured the support of Beshear, but he would not say whether or not he's spoken with her since then.
I'm Aaron Navarro here in Montgomery County, where Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer are holding a joint rally for Vice President Harris's presidential campaign. Now, both Shapiro and Whitmer are on a list of about a dozen contenders for Harris's running mate, sources tell CBS News. But they've had different answers when asked if they would serve as her running mate. Governor Whitmer, on an interview with CBS Mornings today, said that she is committed to serving the rest of her term in Michigan, but also said that America is ready for a two-woman ticket. Governor Shapiro, on the other hand, when is asked, often says that Vice President Harris has to make a, quote, deeply personal decision. Talking to voters here, Pennsylvania voters here at this rally, they want Governor Shapiro to stay in the Commonwealth and finish out his term, but they also think and believe that Governor Shapiro could help Vice President Harris win Pennsylvania and its 19 electoral college votes this November. Pennsylvania is a key part of that blue wall that helped President Biden win in 2020, and it's going to be crucial for Vice President Harris to keep up that electorate and win this November. Now, people I talked to here believe that her being on the top of the ticket does change things in the Commonwealth. There is more optimism and hope that Democrats can succeed here. And one person told me that he believes that Vice President Harris will win the Commonwealth by 3 points. A blowout when you look at past results.
Hi, Ali Novello here in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I've been following Governor Roy Cooper, who's had a lot of attention on him lately because of speculation that Vice President Harris might ask him to join her as her running mate. Now, after chatting with some voters here on the ground in this key battleground state, many have told me that they would love to see him as her running mate. They believe he's done an excellent job as governor for the past 8 years, and they also believe that he would do well in rallying support for her in North Carolina, a state that Donald Trump won in 2016 and 2020. We've even seen North Carolina Democratic Party Chair Anderson Clayton voice her support for him on X, formerly known as Twitter. But when trying to chat with Governor Cooper's team and Governor Cooper himself, they've remained tight-lipped on the topic. Cooper has told reporters that he would not like to comment on it out of respect for Harris's selection process, but he has vowed to continue to support her on the campaign trail, and so far we have seen him make good on this promise. Tonight we can expect to see him on a Zoom call for a Harris campaign event called White Dudes for Harris. We can also expect to see him on a virtual call on Wednesday in trying to support her. So we'll continue to keep our eyes on him as we try to determine who Harris will select as her running mate.
Thank you all for your reporting. And that does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.